So it turns out that so-called rich countries are facing a big problem. People are not having kids. Not enough, at least. On average, women need to have 2 children to keep things balanced, but they're only having 1, or none at all. This issue comes down to the fertility rate, or simply the average number of kids a woman is expected to have in her lifetime. When that number's too low, it means more people are passing away in these countries than being born, and that can destroy the economy. Think of a rich country – the US, Germany, Japan. Great! Pick any wealthy nation you like, and I can promise you one thing – its fertility rate is below 2.1, and that's a problem. Here's why. Meet Mary and John, and over here we've got Jack and Lucy. That's 4 people total. Now, both couples get married. Mary and John have 2 kids, but Jack and Lucy only have 1. Now, what does that mean? Simple math, we're down by 1 person. And if this keeps happening, generation after generation, the population starts to shrink. The situation gets pretty scary when we zoom in on certain countries. Take Spain, Italy, or Poland. These countries have some of the lowest fertility rates in the European Union, with women there having, on average, just 1 kid. And that's a big problem, because it drags down entire economies. Picture a triangle, young people and workers at the bottom and the elderly at the top. In many rich countries, that bottom part is shrinking fast, with fewer babies being born each year. So it's like this triangle is flipping upside down. Fewer young folks and workers, but more and more older people. With fewer workers and more retirees, the economy struggles to stay balanced. It's like the domino effect. Fewer people working means fewer people paying taxes. Meanwhile, the older population at the top keeps growing. And now we have a way bigger group depending on pensions and stuff like Social Security. So we're left asking, who's going to pay for all these retirements? Now, some countries are in hotter water than others, and South Korea is really feeling the heat. They've got more and more people getting older, while fewer and fewer babies are being born. In fact, they've got the lowest fertility rate in the world. In 2023, it hit rock bottom, 0.72 births per woman. Now, personally, I don't know how you can have 3/4 of a kid, but hey, that's statistics for you. Meanwhile, if things keep going like this, Korea's population could shrink by half by 2100. Over the last 20 years, their authorities have invested at the equivalent of $286 billion in this issue, and they've rolled out a bunch of incentives to turn things around. First up, pocket money. If a married couple in Korea decides to have their first kid, the government hands over about $10,000 split into monthly payments to help out. While that might sound impressive, it's only about 3 times the average monthly wage. And in Seoul, one of the most expensive cities in the world, that doesn't go very far. Next, a home. Paying rent in Seoul is insane, but the government doesn't want people to leave the capital because of it. So they're stepping in. Recently, they've promised to give families around $300 a month to help with housing, until the kid turns 2. Then again, $300 seems great, but it only covers about 11% of the rent for a 3-bedroom apartment in the city center. And last but not least, health care. Hospital bills are covered, but the couple must be married, on paper and everything. South Korea came up with all this to fix the problem. Otherwise, their population might get older, poorer, and more dependent on others for care. But when you think about it, all these incentives really come down to one thing – giving out cash. Even so, their demographic problem hasn't gotten any better, so the authorities had to come up with more creative solutions, like offering jobs with flexible hours for parents with kids under 5. And they can borrow things like toys or strollers from the government, totally for free. So, why don't women want to become mothers? There's a bunch of reasons. But one of the most important is work. Women are getting more education and grabbing more opportunities in the job market than ever before. But a lot of jobs have crazy hours, with people working late every single day. So many women get stuck in that cycle, waking up early, going to work, coming home late, and sleeping. Then it all starts over the next day. They don't have time to meet a partner, and even less time to raise someone. In fact, education in general is one of the biggest reasons why birth rates are dropping. Spending so many years in school, then in college, means women are pushing back the age they have their first kid. Once they finish their education, they often want to focus on work and building their careers before starting a family. So they're not becoming moms in their teens or early 20s anymore. And by the time they hit 30, things aren't much better. Sure, they might finally land a stable job, but most employment policies still don't offer enough support for childcare. But it's not only education. Younger generations are getting delayed in, well, everything. I mean, it's way harder for them to tick off all the adulting boxes, like having a well-paying job or buying a nice house. And these things are usually a big part of whether people decide to start a family or not. Another reason people aren't having kids: putting a new human into this world is expensive and time-consuming. The average childcare costs in Australia, for example, have gone up faster than inflation. School tuition, even for public schools, takes a big chunk out of parents' budgets. Think about it: computers, uniforms, field trips, extracurricular activities – all that adds up to the cost of financing someone's education. Over 13 years, parents spend over $80,000 on public education. And if we're talking about private schools, that number jumps up to almost $350,000. And don't worry, these costs are just for one kid. Now imagine having 2 or 3. So what is the solution? Well, there are 2 ways to tackle the problem that don't involve pushing the population to have more kids. Nations can keep their population healthier and employed longer, like what Singapore is doing. They're putting a lot of effort into raising the retirement age, offering midlife training, and encouraging companies to hire older workers, like those over 69. Another way is to encourage people from other countries to come in, especially young ones who are ready to work. That's, for example, the strategy Canada uses. Now, if the goal is really to get women to have more kids, a lot of countries use the baby bonus strategy, basically giving money and benefits to families, just like South Korea does. The problem is that some experts say it is pretty ineffective, as financial incentives don't address the complexity of the issue. For them, what these wealthy countries need to do is offer better career and housing opportunities for young people, like giving incentives for companies to offer more flexible hours or work-from-home options for young parents. They also need to push strategies to lower the cost of housing, especially in big cities. Plus, they need to focus more on the aging population, using technological innovations to support them. That would help not just parents, but families as a whole. So, what do you think? So look at this narrow passage between the north of Morocco and the southern part of the Spanish region. It's called the Strait of Gibraltar. There are only 8 miles between the 2 continents, but for some reason, there's no bridge, despite people having been dreaming for centuries about connecting these 2 regions. There are places in the world where a bridge over water stretches for a much greater distance. For example, the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway near New Orleans, Louisiana, goes for 24 miles, which is 3 times the length of the hypothetical bridge between Africa and Europe. That's listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the longest continuous bridge passing over water. It consists of 2 parallel bridges and connects the urban area of New Orleans with small settlements in the north of Lake Pontchartrain. 9,000 concrete piles hold more than 1,000 decks above the water. This large-scale structure was built in the middle of the 20th century. It only took 14 months from the start of construction to its completion. American engineers created a unique technology for attaching concrete piles to the base of the bridge, and this bridge is still functioning. So, what's the problem with building a shorter bridge to connect Africa and Europe? Let's first find out the value of the 8-mile bridge that could connect 2 continents and the reason why everyone is talking about it. In fact, the value of such a bridge would be enormous. Diamonds, oil, minerals. Africa is full of valuable materials, and Europe is happy to buy these things. This theoretical bridge could allow people to transport things for trade quickly and comfortably. But now, the exchange of goods between Africa and Europe is only possible thanks to airplanes and cargo ships, and airplanes are extremely expensive because of hefty fuel price tags. In addition, air travel is often delayed because of bad weather. There are long customs procedures and transportation from the airport to the destination. Ships can also be a problem. The narrow area of the Mediterranean Sea, where the two continents are closest to each other, is a dangerous place because of storms and strong currents. The transportation of your diamonds is highly dependent on weather conditions. The second advantage of such a bridge would be the creation of tens of thousands of jobs. People from Europe and Africa would build hotels, ports, parks, and even small towns for each other. The coastal parts of both continents would become a new economic center. And just imagine how much investment those places would attract. Europe and Africa would be much closer than ever before. You could drive from a small Spanish town to a safari park in northern Morocco, buy Moroccan tea, get some argan oil, and go home for the evening. Or you could take a high-speed train across the beautiful Mediterranean Sea. People would open hundreds of restaurants, amusement parks, shopping malls, and a museum next to this bridge. But, unfortunately, it's impossible to build such a bridge, at least at the moment. And here's why. The main problem is the Strait of Gibraltar itself, because of its strong currents and seismic activity. How can you start large-scale construction if, in a couple of days, an underwater earthquake can trigger giant waves and take all the ships underwater? Even if you build a bridge, rapid streams of water that constantly change direction can shake the entire structure and tear the connecting parts of the construction. The bridge over the Strait of Gibraltar must have a strong, sturdy system that will withstand seismic activity. Huge resources are required to create such a complex structure. Despite the dangerous passage between the two continents, it remains one of the busiest points in the world. It's the only place on the planet connecting the Mediterranean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. About 300 ships pass through this area every day. Not only merchant ships, but also fishing vessels and tourist boats. There are not so many places in the world where you can watch whales coming out of the water. Not only people, but also marine creatures often visit this passage because of the peculiarities of the sea currents. But we'll talk about that later. Another problem is the depth of the strait. In simple words, any bridge over the water is built on long metal piles. Builders and engineers stick piles into the seabed and use them as a holding base for the whole construction. But installing such piles firmly enough is a difficult task because of the uneven seabed. The seabed has a unique geological landscape, irregularities, and different densities of the Earth's rock. There are also reefs, rocks, and pits. Any seabed requires extensive geological studies before piles are installed. However, the bottom of the Strait of Gibraltar is especially difficult because of its depth, almost 3,000 feet. It's one of the deepest straits in the whole world. Just imagine, you'll need the height of 10 Statues of Liberty to reach the surface of the water from the bottom of the strait. What kind of pile should be used there to hold the entire bridge? Most likely, one pile will have to consist of several parts connected into one large metal rod. And don't forget about seismic activity. Let's say you've installed perfectly strong piles, but the next day, an earthquake occurs and destroys the entire structure. And a strong current is carrying fortifications all over the Mediterranean Sea. The next problem is probably the most important one, because it concerns marine life. The Strait of Gibraltar has a high salt content. This natural element makes water heavier and makes it descend to the bottom of the deep Mediterranean basin. Then, this salt water pushes up cold water from the seabed into the Atlantic Ocean. These changes in water density, as well as fast currents, create sea vortices and turbulence. It's like a raging cauldron of cold water that raises a lot of nutrients to the surface. The hollows and hills of the Strait of Gibraltar are filled with different substances and sunlight, and this creates ideal conditions for the formation of phytoplankton. Whales, dolphins, and other marine creatures adore this delicacy. That's why you can see about 7 species of whales and dolphins in this place. What might happen to phytoplankton after the start of global construction? Carbon dioxide, crushed rock, tons of dust and ashes, falling building materials. All of this could significantly pollute the environment. Without phytoplankton, many fish would go extinct. Without fish, thousands of fishers wouldn't be able to get food and earn money. But even if the bridge was built, cars and trains would continue to pollute the air and water. This disruption of the delicate balance in this narrow strait can lead to larger-scale environmental disasters. Dolphins and whales may leave to look for food elsewhere, and thus take resources from other marine inhabitants. Like falling dominoes, one problem can follow another. And all this because of one bridge. In 2007, the Spanish Ministry of Environmental Protection introduced speed limits for all ships sailing through the strait in order to not disrupt the delicate balance of nature. At the beginning of the 20th century, a French engineer proposed a project of a bridge, but it was rejected because it was too complicated and costly. People also tried to develop a 23-mile-long tunnel, but this project also faced financial and technical difficulties. People are still dreaming of a bridge over the Strait of Gibraltar. Perhaps, in the future, when we develop cooler technologies, we'll be able to build this thing. Oh, by the way, there hasn't always been water between these two regions. In the distant past, the two continents were connected. The entire Mediterranean Sea is the remains of the Tethys Sea that existed before the era of dinosaurs. Then the African and Indian plates collided with the Eurasian one, and the Tethys Sea completely disappeared. In its place, a land bridge was formed that separated the Mediterranean Sea from the ocean. Without access to water, the sea dried up about 6 million years ago. But then, when the bridge came down, the water began to fill the dried-up pool. For tens of thousands of years, the narrow plate sank lower and lower, and the Mediterranean Sea eventually got its current water levels.
To build an underwater structure, you'll need some interesting engineering. A large bridge over a river or bay has its foundation rooted underwater. It's even more complicated with undersea tunnels. Underwater construction is challenging. Engineers need to deal with water pressure and corrosion from salt water. There's also a problem of finding suitable materials. The most typical of them are concrete, steel, and acrylic glass. Concrete doesn't care about water currents and doesn't get damaged by salt water. Steel provides underwater constructions with a strong structure. And acrylic glass is tough, long-lasting, and resistant to sunlight. It's also transparent. That's why it's often used to make windows in underwater buildings. Anyway, when the water is shallow, it's not that hard to build something there. Constructors create a temporary foundation. Then, on top of it, they build several piers supporting the upper structure. But if the waters are deep, engineers have to use other methods. Depending on which one they choose, water is either extracted or diverted during the construction process. One such method involves using a set of large driven piles. Those are long, thin columns made mostly of steel, but their interior is partially hollow. With the help of a huge hammer, they get driven into the waterbed, like nails are driven into a piece of wood. After that, these steel columns get filled with concrete through a special tube. The concrete displaces the water that was in the pile before. Concrete has the ability to set even when it's surrounded by water. That's why driven piles eventually turn into a stable foundation for overwater and underwater constructions. Driven piles are a very cost-effective way of building something that has to be fixed in place. They prevent things from being moved by the water current. Another way to build underwater structures is cofferdams. They are built temporarily and allow workers to create a dry space for the construction. The water gets pumped out of this enclosure, and the cofferdam works like a dam. A completed cofferdam looks like a massive pit with high walls surrounded by water. Cofferdams are made of rocks, steel, and even dirt. These constructions can be built fast and removed even faster. But the process of putting up a cofferdam is complicated and challenging for engineers. They have to make sure the structure won't flood or collapse. The simplest way to build a cofferdam is to pile up loads of dirt. But in this case, workers usually have to somehow make the construction stronger. It helps to protect it from the damage caused by water. Once the cofferdam is ready, pumps extract the water from its interior. Sometimes it's too expensive to build a very deep and strong cofferdam. In this case, constructors use several powerful pumps that get rid of excess water when it seeps through the cofferdam walls. If a cofferdam starts to fail, This process is slow and, luckily, predictable. On the construction site, there are not only main but also backup pumps. In case of emergency, they can kick into overdrive. Then, the water is kept out for the time the personnel needs to evacuate. Cofferdams are most often used during the construction of dams and bridges. But when a large ship, like a modern cruise liner, needs to be repaired, engineers use cofferdams too. Such vessels are too massive to be hauled ashore, and a cofferdam makes a perfect dry lock. The ship gets isolated from the water, and mechanics can repair it wherever it sits. Also, when a cruise ship needs to be expanded, engineers construct a cofferdam around it. Then they pump out all the water from the inside, creating a dry working place. The ship gets cut into two parts, and the process of its lengthening begins. There are several main types of cofferdams: braced, cellular, rock-filled, or earthen. For each of them, engineers need to figure out the best depth at which the wall should be put into the ground. It depends on the type of soil and the water reservoir itself. Braced cofferdams are mostly used during shallow water construction. Such a structure is actually a wall of sheet piles. Those are parts with interlocking edges. Usually, they're made of steel, but the material can also be reinforced concrete or timber. Sheet piles create something like a box around the needed area. Cellular cofferdams are also made of sheet piles, but in this case, the piles have a special shape. After being connected, they form cells that get filled with soil or clay. The cells, in turn, create a watertight wall. Thanks to its structure, it's exceptionally stable. Rock-filled cofferdams are used when there's a lot of rock at the construction site. They're built over the soil. This prevents the water from seeping into the cofferdam, and the rocks serve as reinforcement. Earthen cofferdams are built in areas where the water is less than 10 feet deep. They're created from the materials that are at hand: clay, sand, and even soil. There are also single-walled and double-walled cofferdams. The first type is used when the area of the construction isn't large and the depth is more than 20 feet. Such cofferdams are typically necessary for building bridges. Timber or wooden sheets are put into the sea or riverbed. After that, iron or steel sheets are added on the inside. On both sides of the wall, workers place half-filled bags of sand. Finally, the water gets pumped out and the cofferdam is ready for use. The double-walled cofferdam is used for large construction areas and when the water is very deep. Such construction sites need more powerful supports. This stronger cofferdam has two walls, which provides it with extra stability. Two piles get pushed into the waterbed with some space in between. The deeper it is, the bigger the space between the walls. Then they get attached to each other. After that, this space gets filled with soil. Cofferdams aren't cheap. This means that if one is used for a project, there are no other available options. For example, it's the best way to construct permanent dams. When the Hoover Dam was built, several cofferdams were put up to divert the water from the Colorado River. As soon as the project is finished, the water is pumped back into the cofferdam, and its walls, whatever they are, get removed. One more way of underwater construction is caissons. They're watertight structures that are put into the water. Even open, they remain dry inside. Workers can keep digging down until they reach some solid surface. That's where the caisson will be placed upon. What's so different about caissons is that they eventually become parts of the foundation for, let's say, a bridge or a dam. And even though you might not think of a bridge or a dam as an underwater construction, most of their crucial elements are underwater. For example, a large bridge wouldn't be able to hold its weight without massive supporting towers, and they stand in the water. There are several types of caissons: open, pneumatic, and box. Open caissons have no bottom. They're actually just vertical walls that allow builders to dig at the bottom of them. Pneumatic caissons keep the water from seeping through by using compressed air. This helps to maintain equal pressure inside and outside the construction. When workers dig out some materials, these get sent up through a special muck tube. When the caisson reaches the bedrock, workers fill it with concrete. Unlike others, a box caisson has a floor, and workers lower it onto a foundation that is constructed in advance. During the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, engineers used two massive caissons. Thanks to them, they reached the bedrock and created the foundation for the towers of the bridge. And then there's also off-site construction. That's when things are not only built, but also assembled away from the site. In this case, engineers often use modular construction. That's when factory-produced building units are delivered to the site. There, they get assembled, like a giant Lego set. Structures are then usually floated to the site on huge barges, or they get towed there. After that, they're lowered in place. Some sink under their own weight. Others can only reach the seafloor after getting loaded with additional weights. This method of construction is rather expensive, and still, it's much more cost-effective than building right underwater. The latter needs skilled engineers and unique tools, and don't forget about the risks. But what about underwater tunnels? How on earth are they constructed? Modern tunnels are usually built with the help of massive tunnel boring machines. They even have a nickname, moles. Even though such a mechanism has an exorbitant price, several $1 million, it needs little time to create a long tunnel. The machine moves forward very slowly. It has a special circular plate with rotating disc cutters. They can easily chew through solid rock. The rock is then dropped onto an outboard conveyor belt. Another mechanism uses this rock to construct the tunnel's lining in the mole's wake. This way, the mole not only excavates the tunnel, but also reinforces the walls that will later support it. This method, and 11 huge tunnel boring machines, was used to build the 32-mile-long Channel Tunnel, and the whole process took only 3 years. Cut and cover is another method of creating a tunnel underwater. First, workers dig a trench in the ocean floor or riverbed. Then, they put concrete or steel tubes there, made in advance. After the tubes get covered with a thick layer of rock, the sections are connected. All workers have to do is pump out the water. That's how the Ted Williams Tunnel, connecting Logan Airport with South Boston, was built. There, they used 12 enormous steel tubes, more than 300 feet each, and the tubes contained already fully constructed roads.
There's a stretch of water that even the most experienced explorers fear. No matter what season you choose to cross it in, you risk meeting face-to-face with waves that can reach as tall as the Hollywood sign. I'm talking about the Drake Passage, the waterway connecting the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean, stretching from Cape Horn at South America's southernmost tip to Antarctica's South Shetland Islands. It's about as wide as the distance from London to Berlin and takes up to 48 hours to cross. Some sailors compare getting on the other side to going to the moon. That's how challenging it is. Even the man who discovered it, Sir Francis Drake, never sailed these waters because they seemed too dangerous to him and opted for a calmer, although longer, Strait of Magellan. The passage took the lives of around 20,000 sailors and over 800 ships. Tourists who want to see Antarctica cross the Drake Passage on a regular basis, although it's still often called the world's most terrifying ocean crossing. The Antarctic Peninsula, where travelers go, isn't really part of Antarctica itself. It sticks out and points towards South America like two fingers almost touching it. The water gets squeezed between these two land masses, making strong ocean currents. The passage is part of the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, the largest ocean current on Earth. The water rushes through the passage at a speed between 95 and 150 million cubic meters per second, which makes it rougher. And then there are winds that usually blow from west to east and are very strong between 40 and 60 degrees latitude. That's why those areas are called the Roaring 40s, Furious 50s, and Screaming 60s. Land slows down winds, which is why storms hitting Ireland and the UK get weaker as they move east. But Drake's latitude is the only place where winds can blow all around the Earth without being stopped by land. So they keep getting faster. These strong winds turn into huge waves that can hit ships really hard, normally around 13 to 16 feet tall. They're much higher than waves in the Atlantic. Drake Passage also has underwater mountains that you can't see. The huge current squeezes through this narrow passage and causes waves to crash against these mountains underwater. These internal waves create whirls that bring cold water up from the deep ocean. So it's not just rough on the surface, the water is wild all the way down. The first sailor managed to sail around Cape Horn and through the Drake Passage in 1616. It was a Dutch navigator, Willem Schouten, in 1616. But the most famous attempt to cross it was undertaken by Sir Ernest Henry Shackleton on his ship named Endurance. He and 27 of his men set off from South Georgia, aiming to reach Vassal Bay in Antarctica. But things didn't go as planned. On January 19, 1915, their ship got stuck in the ice. And by October, it began to sink. They camped on floating ice for 2 months before sailing lifeboats to a remote, icy place called Elephant Island. Shackleton and 5 men made a risky journey to South Georgia to get help. It took them 15 days to cross Drake Passage with hurricane winds. Finally, they arrived safely and organized a rescue for the rest of their crew. Scientists found the shipwreck of Endurance only in 2022, 10,000 feet below the water. In December of 2019, 6 fearless athletes decided to cross the Drake Passage by rowing a boat for the first time in history. It took them 12 days of non-stop rowing with a 90-minute rotation of rowers. They managed to do it, and it was probably the hardest possible way to cross the passage. The athletes mentioned it was cold, wet, and dirty, and the waves hit them like walls. The weather in the Drake Passage changes a lot, but ship captains can always see it coming and change their path. They will move the departure time to have a safety margin and not to get stuck in the middle of the passage in the worst possible conditions. Sometimes, the journey will be smooth and calm, and they call it Drake Lake. Other times, people on the ship will feel rough waves, which is called Drake Shake. Some experienced captains who often cross the passage say that the Drake Lake effect happens once in every 10 crossings, and they see the Drake Shake once or twice in every 10 journeys. A schooner or a kayak will probably not survive the journey among giant waves, but modest vessels and cruise ships have sturdy hulls and advanced stabilizing mechanisms. So, the journey isn't that dangerous anymore, but still, it's quite an adventure, especially if you're seasick. If you don't feel like risking it but want to travel from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean by water the fast way, the Panama Canal is waiting for you. People first started thinking about making a water path across Panama in the 16th century. Back then, a Spanish explorer found out that only a thin piece of land separated the two oceans. But it seemed impossible to build it because of the mountains and thick jungle, so the idea had to wait a couple of centuries. Finally, in 1880, France, led by the man who built the Suez Canal in Egypt, tried to make the canal. But the people who started the construction soon found out it was much harder than it looked on a map. The land in Panama was one of the toughest and most dangerous places to dig a big waterway. Workers had to literally move huge mountains in a jungle full of snakes, where it was really hot and rainy. During the wet season, heavy rain turned rivers into wild rapids and soaked the workers. Sometimes, they didn't see the sun for 2 weeks, and their clothes stayed wet all the time. Big rocks were falling, and tiny mosquitoes that carried malaria made people very sick. And then, an earthquake happened on top of everything. They were losing thousands of people. That's why France decided to abandon the project after 7 years. Then, the United States bought the French assets in the canal zone and finished it by 1914. It cost the US around $375 million. The 50-mile-long passage of water saves ships traveling between New York and San Francisco 7,872 miles. Around 14,000 ships use it every year and pay around $1.8 million in tolls. So it looks like it all paid off. Another challenging waterway in this part of the world is the Amazon River. It's around 4,300 miles long and flows through 3 countries with over 30 million people living in its basin. But there isn't a single bridge across it. The river has many marshes and soft soils, so engineers would need to build very long bridges and very deep foundations, which costs a lot of money. Building bridges over deep water is tough, but in other places in the world, engineers can use things like floating platforms to help. The river's path and water levels change a lot during the year. During the dry season from June to November, the river is usually 2 to 6 miles wide. But in the wet season from December to April, the river can become as wide as 30 miles. And the water level can rise by 50 feet. That's why they can't build floating bridges or pontoons. The riverbanks are made of soft dirt that moves and erodes with the seasons, and it makes things even harder. It would have to be an absolutely unique project to overcome all these challenges. Luckily, there's no pressing need for a bridge across the Amazon right now. The river mostly goes through areas that are sparsely populated, so there aren't so many major roads to be connected by bridges.
You'd be surprised to find out the life-changing discoveries a person can make just by browsing Google Maps. Like this guy, who found a suspicious crater and might have made a major scientific discovery. In 2024, Canadian Joël Lupoint was planning a casual camping trip in his homeland. He opened Google Earth and zoomed in Quebec's Côte-Nord region. That's when he saw it, this unusual rounded structure. The measurement was impressive, 9.3 miles from one point to another, and there seemed to be a lake next to it. He was quick to print the screen and sent the image to a French geophysicist to see if he knew anything about it. Most times these images turn out to be nothing, or simply Google Earth watermarks. But he was surprised when he opened his email and saw the scientist's reply. The geophysicist said that, judging by the looks of the topography, Lupoint could have discovered a meteor impact area. Now, impact areas are really hard to identify. Since they've been around for millions of years, most of their shapes have been heavily changed by erosion. Scientists call these areas impact structures. They're usually circular or crater-like and are made up of deformed bedrock. It happens when a meteor falls into the surface of the Earth. Here's the thing. Since the crater has huge walls around it, these areas are usually mistaken for mountain ranges. That's what left the Canadian explorer confused. But the French geophysicist that analyzed the case gave him hope. That weird formation in Quebec had been classified as a type of volcanic formation. After Lupoint brought this subject back to the agenda, scientists had to dig a little deeper to find the truth. Until this recent discovery, scientists thought the area looked like that due to some volcanic formation. This is actually normal, since other things such as volcanism and sinkholes can be mistaken for impact craters. To verify, they asked for some samples of the site. This is a more reliable way to fact-check whether a meteor landed there or not. When the meteor hits the Earth, it brings different types of minerals from outer space. That's the wonderful thing about impact craters. They reveal a link between Earth and the outside universe. By now, scientists have cataloged most of the minerals that are native to our planet. When they're searching for an impact structure, they usually look for things such as tinnite and chemisite, which can only be found in meteors. The biggest known impact crater in the world is the Vredefort crater, located in South Africa. This big thing was formed some 4 billion years ago. The asteroid that made it is estimated to have been one of the largest ever to strike planet Earth. When the researchers got the results of the site back in Canada, they did confirm that it contained zircon, a mineral that tends to show areas of impact. There's no way to guarantee that Lupoint really found an impact crater, but scientists are organizing a research mission over to the area just to make sure. If it turns out that it really is an impact crater, that's pretty huge news, since the last discovery was made in 2013. Another one of these mesmerizing discoveries came from a 15-year-old boy. William Goddery was also a Canadian, and for some reason loved looking for long-lost Mayan cities. Different from the previous story, William had an intention and a research methodology. He had studied many books on Mayan civilizations. He believed that Mayans built their cities in relation to the stars in the sky. So he opened a book and mapped all the cities that have already been unearthed. And that's when he noticed something important. There is an area in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico where archaeologists have unearthed 2 Mayan cities. But on the constellation map, there are 3 stars. He thought to himself, could this mean there is a lost city waiting to be discovered nearby? William Goddery is known to be a science genius and has even won an award for this constellation theory. When he noticed that a 3rd city was missing from the 23rd constellation he was examining, he began to search Google Earth for satellite pictures that could help him solve this mystery. Advances in satellite tech have shed new light on long-lost Mayan cities such as Tikal. Located in the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, Tikal is believed to have been the capital of the ancient Mayan Empire. He had hopes, so he reached out to a friend inside the Canadian Space Agency to verify what he had found. Since he had already won awards for his research, he had friends in high places. And that's when things got interesting. According to the images, there was a large square area on the border of Mexico and Belize that looked like the remains of a city. William took the images to a remote sensing expert. They studied the images thoroughly and concluded that the area could be housing 30 buildings and even a large pyramid. William named the new city he discovered as Mouth of Fire. However, his story was very much contested inside the archaeological community, and many Mayan experts worked to debunk William's findings. Experts say that constellation theories are too unscientific. Renowned anthropologists and astronomers said William's methodology was an act of creative imagination. Still, a 15-year-old teen almost found a long-lost Mayan city, which is pretty exciting if you ask me. What about these tiny dots that appeared on images of Google Earth? These strange spotted circles were found in the middle of the Algerian desert. A YouTuber browsing on Google Earth found these circles and discovered that people had been debating over their origin for years. He thought they were a glitch from satellite images. There are dozens of them, stretching for miles and miles in a straight line. They're far away from any town, road, or human activity, making it hard to understand if it was man-made or just a natural phenomenon. To settle this mystery, he interviewed the people who took Google Earth's pictures. He found out they were 100% true. The circles were there in real life. They appear in multiple pictures from multiple years. Now, at first, he guessed they were the result of oil activity. Algeria is a rich area for natural resources, so this made sense. To find out if the area is worth extracting, companies usually undertake seismic surveys. They're a way of analyzing the Earth's surface by sending shock waves into the ground. Depending on how these waves bounce back, you'll know what is located underground. There was another possibility. The Sahara is a very dry area of the planet. The average high temperatures in summer are over 104 degrees Fahrenheit. To survive there, people need to find ways of accessing water. So, his second guess was that the circles were kind of ruin or leftover from ancient water wells. But when he talked to an expert, he found out they weren't ancient water wells. You can see some of these traditional constructions in other cities on Google Earth, and they look really different from the mysterious circles. He decided to travel over to Algeria to find out the truth. He drove 99 miles into the heart of the desert, and when he gets there, he sees it. A huge crater dug on the sand, surrounded by 12 smaller holes. It kind of looked like the ancestor of a modern clock. There, he found something he couldn't spot on Google Earth: thin metal wires. When the curious YouTuber and his teams started to dig in the sand, they found old dynamite and some sardine cans. Apparently, they were hiding the truth. The Sahara Circles, as they were famously called, were not the historical leftovers of seismic surveying. Back at the time when these circles were made, this technology didn't even exist, but they were sure related to oil exploration. The dynamite holes were an ancient method of oil searching, and the sardine cans? Well, they were left by the workers who were exploring the region. Another Google Earth mystery solved. There's a mysterious island that appears and disappears like magic. Just like Schrödinger's cat, this Schrödinger's island exists and doesn't exist at the same time. Officially, it's called Sandy Island, and it once appeared in maps, but it was never there in real life. Australian scientists decided to solve the mystery once and for all by embarking on an adventure to find this elusive archipelago. But when they reached the coordinates, all they found was endless blue waves. It's like the island was playing a game of hide-and-seek with them. This story goes back to 1876. A whaling ship was crossing the area and reported an island. Whoever saw it said it was over 15 miles long north to south and around 3 miles wide, about the size of Manhattan, so not so tiny at all. But every time researchers went to visit the area, they found nothing. So in 1974, an official mission from New Caledonia declared that Sandy Island was simply not a thing and excluded it from all maps. People went on with their lives until they noticed that the island was appearing on Google Earth as a black blob. In 2012, another Australian expedition went out to check out the area to get some explanations. They had to write a eulogy for the long-lost island and explain what could have created this mess. For starters, mapping technology wasn't at its peak back in the 1900s. It was easy to get the coordinates wrong. Then there was the fact that the area is big on volcanic activities. It's likely that volcanic lava cooled down and created a raft of some kind. Let's say that the whaling ship went by, saw the volcanic raft, and thought it was land from a distance. But hey, it's just a guess. Humans have ventured far and wide across the globe, and it may have seemed at some point that we discovered each and every nook of our planet. But when Mount Lico popped up on Google Earth, scientists were overcome with excitement. This hidden gem in northern Mozambique is no ordinary rainforest. It's nestled inside a volcano. Determined to confirm the existence of this mysterious forest, experts assembled a team of top-notch scientists and specialists from around the world. The journey to Mount Lico was no walk in the park, with a daunting vertical rock climb standing between them and the forest. But after 6 years of planning and preparation, they were ready for the challenge. Once they got there, they saw it was even better than they imagined. The place was like a perfectly tended garden. The forest sounded unique and different from other rainforests. There were some insanely huge caterpillars that looked dangerous. And they even found ancient pots and evidence of an untouched human ecosystem. Ooh! Terra incognita means unknown land. And one of the largest unknown territories being uncovered today is the land beneath Antarctica's ice sheets. Below the snowy surface, there is an entirely new world of canyons, waterways, and lakes, which are now being mapped. One can't help but wonder, is there really liquid water below Antarctica's frozen surface? Yep. Water can exist without freezing due to pressure. The liquid water is the result of Earth's warm interior, and that's how we get things such as Lake Vostok. Now, you can't see it, but Lake Vostok is right here. Located in East Antarctica, it lies beneath 2.5 miles of thick ice. This huge lake is about 4,800 square miles. Humans could only discover it with the help of some top-notch technologies like seismic soundings and ice-penetrating radars. According to these scientists, it's likely that the lake has been there for up to 15 million years. Bhutan is on the map for, among other things, being the happiest country in all of Asia. But it kept a hidden gem for all these years, one of the world's tallest unclimbed mountains, Kunkar Pansum. Bhutan is enmeshed in the glorious Himalayan mountains. That's why the climbing community was beyond excited when they discovered an untouched mountain. Imagine being the first person to climb an unexplored peak. That would probably guarantee you a spot in the Guinness World Records for sure. The mountain has been untouched because of a Bhutanese law. For locals, the mountain peak is a sacred site, shrouded in mystery and legends. One of their beliefs is that the sacredness of climbing a mountain lies not in reaching its peak, but in truly communing with the mountain and enjoying the process. We got to admit, that is a bit of a newsflash for Westerners. If you're ever in the state of New York, make sure you check out the Aglo General Store. You'll have to drive somewhere around the Catskills to find a beautiful, grand, big nothing. Aglo is one of America's most famous paper towns, aka a fake town. But this case is different from Sandy Island. Aglo Town never existed, and it wasn't a mistake. You see, there's an old copyright practice amongst map makers. They add in paper towns so they can know when someone is simply copy-pasting their work. What they didn't expect is that this would get completely out of hand. Some say that one day a guy picked up a map at a gas station that had Aglo Town marked in it. The person decided to open a store over there and named it Aglo General Store. Some say the guy who opened the store faced a lawsuit from the map makers. Anyways, it only lasted enough years to become a national joke. Americans drove from all over the U.S. to get a picture of the town's fake welcome sign. And then we've got Bermeja Island, located in the Gulf of Mexico. This funky island appeared on many maps of the 16th and 17th centuries. It was probably drawn by Spanish explorers. Sure, the exact location varied from map to map, and its name sometimes appeared as Bermeja, but its existence was certain enough. The Bermeja Island was last seen in a 1921 Mexican map, and then, poof, it dropped out of the horizon altogether. People started talking and wondering, did the island sink? Was it destroyed? In 2009, 3 official investigations happened to search for the island. They used high-tech technologies to scour the Mexican seabed, but Bermeja was nowhere. Researchers had multiple guesses on what it could be. Let's delve on one of these ideas. The idea was probably made up by old-day explorers to mislead their enemies in search of land and gold. Well, that seems plausible. Now, let's take a look at Rio de Janeiro. Once, the city was filled with informal territories. These places are known as slums or favelas. They're like mini-cities inside the big city. Some favelas are known to be underprivileged territories, where dwellers don't get the same urban perks as other citizens, such as the sewage system and garbage pickups. These slums grew so quickly that the government didn't have time to keep track of their developments. So today, it's usually the dwellers themselves that name the streets and make do with whatever they have at their disposal. One of the biggest slums in Brazil is located in Rio de Janeiro, the so-called Hacienda, and it was only recognized as a neighborhood by the local government in the 1990s. Our own ocean floor is less mapped than Venus, Mars, and the Moon. In fact, 95% of our oceans are unexplored. Strange, right? We do have the available technology, which is mainly sonar soundings, sending wave sounds to the ocean bed and registering what they hear back. One of the main advantages of mapping the seabed more thoroughly would be to get more insight to marine hazards such as earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions. Plus, there are so many unidentified marine life. This could give us a great insight into preservation and discovering the true dynamics of our marine ecosystems. A mega drought might hit Australia soon, and this isn't just about a couple of dry seasons. We're talking about 20 years of little or no rain. While Australia could be facing the longest and most devastating drought since official records began, the rest of the world might struggle to buy bread, flour, or cereals. Energy prices are likely to spike globally, and neighboring countries like New Zealand, Indonesia, and Malaysia must be prepared to receive Australians directly affected by the lack of water. To truly understand how severe this situation could become, we should first examine past disasters. First off, Australia is no stranger to droughts, and this phenomenon can happen across their entire territory. From 2017 to 2019, the southeast part of the country went through what they call the tinderbox drought. This was a severe bone-dry event where the cooler months saw only about half the usual rainfall. Parts of Australia became so dry that wildfires were a constant threat. Crops failed, and water was scarce. This drought was also thought to have contributed to the Black Summer fire disaster. By the end of 2019, bushfires were raging across the country on a scale never seen before, with people describing them as rivers of lava flowing down from treetops. The losses were staggering. The tourist industry alone took a hit of $2.8 billion, and over 7,000 jobs disappeared as a result of this difficult period. The tinderbox drought was a big reminder of what Australia might face in the future. That's why it's so important to understand what happened in the past to get a full picture of a possible 20-year mega drought. But there is one problem. Even though droughts are relatively common in Australia, the rainfall data available until today isn't enough for researchers to predict the future, and our records only go back to around 1900. So experts decided to study tree rings to uncover missing environmental data. If you look at a tree stump, you'll notice concentric rings on its surface. As trees grow, they form new rings, and the thickness of these rings depends on how much water they get. During a mega drought, the rings appear thinner because the trees don't have much water. Unfortunately, these natural records usually only go back a few hundred years, and it only tells us about specific local conditions, not the situation across all of Australia. So, experts turn to computer models to simulate how Earth's climate changed from the year 850 to 2000. This approach helped them to paint a picture of when megadroughts might have occurred in Australia and how to predict what might happen in the future. But what they were really interested in was whether the human factor might be making this scenario worse over the years and if we are somehow intensifying these dry periods. So, are we to blame for these megadroughts? The short answer is, we're not sure yet. On one hand, dry periods in Australia do seem to last longer than they did before factories and machines became common. On the other hand, they don't seem to be getting more intense or happening more often than before industrial times. This means a drought lasting 20 years might not be directly linked to human activities. Actually, this kind of phenomenon is just a normal part of how rainfall changes in Australia over time. This is backed up by evidence from ice cores, which suggests that a 39-year drought hit eastern Australia around 800 years ago. What makes it all so fascinating is that there isn't just one cause for this phenomenon. I mean, there is no single mechanism that explains all cases of megadroughts. It happens because the right combination of ocean and atmospheric conditions come together, and you end up with a drought. And just by random chance, you might have periods where there are 100-year-long droughts. Despite what many people think, megadroughts are not geographically isolated. They have occurred on every continent except Antarctica over the past 2,000 years, and are often linked to natural events. For instance, megadroughts in North America and Southwest South America were driven by El Niño, where the Pacific Ocean near the equator gets warmer than usual, disturbing normal weather patterns. They are not rare events either. In fact, the U.S. Southwest has been experiencing a megadrought since 2000. It's being considered the driest period in 1,200 years for the region. Major reservoirs like Lake Mead and Lake Powell are at low levels. Heat waves are hitting cities like Phoenix and Las Vegas harder than ever, and wildfires are happening more frequently as the land gets drier. Now, let's think about the future. Even though we have a very recent and concrete example from the U.S., research can't exactly predict how a 20-year megadrought would play out in Australia. Usually, such events show up mainly as reduced rainfall and snowfall. But in most areas, the increase in drought risk will be caused by a warmer, more arid atmosphere. So the ground will probably look parched and cracked, rivers and lakes will likely shrink, and the sky will be relentlessly clear and blue, with barely a cloud in sight. Farmers might struggle to grow crops, making grocery prices rise worldwide. Things like bread, flour, and cereals may become scarcer, as Australia supplies about 13% of global wheat exports. Coal mines might be affected, as they depend on water for extraction, washing, and processing. That might drive up power costs for industries around the world, which could be passed on to consumers, impacting global growth and inflation. As cities might face water shortages, Australians will likely find new ways to conserve every drop or maybe move to New Zealand or Southeast Asia. Now, you're probably thinking, when is this big event going to happen? Honestly, it's really hard to predict exactly. Megadroughts can happen every 150 to 1,000 years, but experts think Australia should be ready for one to happen in the next 10 years or so. And this possibly should be taken seriously. This phenomenon has been known to contribute to the collapse of entire civilizations. Take the Akkadians of Mesopotamia, who built the world's first empire more than 4,000 years ago. Studies of moisture at the ruins of Akkadian cities suggest that they experienced a massive drought lasting 300 years, and this may have led to their collapse. A similar thing happened to the Assyrian Empire, which existed over 2,700 years ago, in what is now northern Iraq. For years, it was a real mystery why they left their capital of Nineveh and never returned. But recent studies of a stalagmite in the Cunaba cave revealed that the rise and fall of the empire coincided with a wet period followed by a 125-year-long mega-drought. Because they were very dependent on seasonal rain for agriculture, this dry period made their life much harder. Even though experts now believe they probably left because of the dryness, the question of where they went is still a mystery. So, yep, mega droughts may have played a role in the collapse of great civilizations in the past. But on the positive side, we've come a long way since then, and recent climate technologies can help us prepare for events like this. Now that we know a 20-year megadrought is very much possible and might happen soon, Australia has some time to get ready for it. Developing strong water management plans to mitigate the severe impacts of a megadrought is more than necessary, and it's also important to create community support networks to provide emotional and financial support to people, particularly farmers, who are more affected directly by this event. If initiatives like these emerge in the coming years, those 20 years of drought could be less intense than most people might expect. So get this, Taylor Swift takes a flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo that leaves at 10 a.m. on February 20th. She's on the plane for 12 hours, but she lands only at 2 p.m. the next day in Tokyo. That's a 28-hour difference. So, how did this time warp happen? Well, it's all because of this wonky line. This is the International Date Line. You know, that imaginary line that slices the globe in half and decides who gets to celebrate the new year first? It's the Line Islands, by the way. But crossing this line doesn't just make you feel like you've stepped into a transporter. It actually changes your day. Cross from east to west and boom, it's 24 hours later. If you travel in the opposite direction, crossing the line from the western side to the eastern side, you go back an entire calendar day. Now, you'd think that the International Date Line would be a nice, neat, straight line in the ocean where the time zones switch. But in reality, it's as if someone took a ruler and said, let's make this complicated. The line zigzags all over the place, wrapping around islands and causing all sorts of head-scratching confusion. For instance, Big Diomede Island and Little Diomede Island are only 2.5 miles apart, but have a 21-hour time difference. And things can get a little more complicated depending on which time zone a country follows. For example, if you travel 659 miles across the date line from Baker Island to Tokelau, you must add 25 hours. In other words, that's 1 day and 1 hour. And if that doesn't sound weird enough for you, wait, it gets crazier. When it's 6 o'clock in the morning on Thursday in New York, it's still Wednesday night in American Samoa. Meanwhile, over in Kiribati, it's already Friday. Yep, we're talking about 3 different calendar days happening at the same time because of this one imaginary crazy line. This phenomenon occurs every day between 10 o'clock and 10:59 in the morning. So, why does the International Date Line look so ridiculous in the first place? Well, great question. Although these zigzags may seem completely arbitrary, they actually have a logical basis. It's pretty much a made-up concept based on the Earth's rotation. The Earth is always spinning, thank goodness, and it takes about 24 hours, or a day, to complete one full rotation. To keep things in sync, people took the Earth and divided it into 24 time zones, each 15 degrees apart. But what is the starting point for a day on Earth? Well, basically, people needed to figure out which of these 24 zones or lines would be the starting line, or the chronocenter. They needed a reference point, a line where they could begin adding or subtracting time as you move east or west. That line is what we now call the prime meridian. But here's the catch. Deciding where to put this starting line, the prime meridian, is totally arbitrary. The idea of establishing a line where days begin and end goes all the way back to at least the 1300s. Back then, map makers were doing their own thing, picking their own east-west dividing lines called meridians, which, by the way, is just a fancy Latin word for midday. Without a universal standard for when a day officially started or ended, sailors on long voyages just had to wing it, figuring out how to handle the time they were gaining or losing along the way. So, in 1884, people decided to organize this whole mess. 25 nations gathered at the prestigious International Meridian Conference in the United States with one big goal: to decide on a line that would serve as the official prime meridian. Finally, like it or not, they were determined to create the International Date Line that the whole world would accept and would follow from that point forward. The prime meridian was established in Greenwich, England, and the International Date Line was placed on the opposite side, running through the 180th meridian. Well, sounds simple, right? But that's when the nightmare really began. The chosen international dateline didn't just wander through uninhabited areas. Oh no! It split some countries in half and created all sorts of chaos. I mean, if you divide the world with a completely straight vertical line, you end up with situations where half of a country is 1 day ahead and the other half is 1 day behind. Take Kiribati, for example. The country is primarily centered in the Gilbert Islands, which sits just west of the international dateline. However, in 1979, their territory got a little bigger with the Phoenix and Line Islands, which are way east of the dateline. Suddenly, Kiribati was straddling the international dateline. This created a bit of a headache for businesses. Folks on either side could only communicate by radio or phone for 4 weekdays a week. Now, to fix this quirky situation, Kiribati decided to skip Saturday, December 31st, 1994, right off the calendar. So Friday, December 30th, turned into Sunday, January 1st, 1995. And just like that, New Year's Day came a day early. Woohoo! After that, the dateline moved eastward to go around the entire country. So the same thing that happened to Kiribati happened to other countries as well. For example, when they got to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, the line made another detour to include them. And when they got south of the equator, well, guess what? Another eastward bend to cover even more islands. And that's pretty much why the straight line started to get a bit ziggy-zaggy. This wonky line is designed to avoid land as much as possible, so there's less hassle when it comes to changing days. So, no, you can't stand between the international dateline, like having one foot in one day and the other in the next. But you can cross it by boat. In fact, some fancy trans-Pacific cruises even offer a time travel package for adventurous travelers who want to cross the line and jump into the future. Now, in the end, the international dateline looks this ridiculous because it was constructed based on a series of arbitrary decisions, historical quirks, and a whole lot of confusion. But it's not just because people organized it in the 19th century that there is no confusion regarding time zones today. Another thing that the prime meridian establishes is Coordinated Universal Time, the famous UTC. Now, UTC never changes for daylight savings time or anything else. However, in 1908, Canada decided to spice things up by creating Daylight Saving Time, or DST. Their idea was to set the clocks 1 hour ahead of Standard Time to make better use of sunlight in the spring and summer and fall evenings. The idea was so brilliant that most countries jumped on board, but not everyone. Just look at Nepal. They have never ever used the Daylight Savings Time, which means their clocks do not change throughout the entire year. As you probably know, countries with large territories often have more than one time zone. Just like the United States, which has 11 time zones. Australia has 9, while India is a special case. Look, India is a big country with an area that stretches around 1,800 miles from west to east. So it should have 3 time zones in total, but they only have 1. This means that the sun rises almost 90 minutes earlier in Dong in the Far East than in Gujarmoti in the West. And why do they have only 1 time zone? Well, basically, because they can. Just remember that the international dateline and time zones are invisible, artificial, and now you know, totally arbitrary. So if a country wants to stick with just 1 time zone to simplify processes and business operations within its border, then hey, why not? Do you know how many continents there are on Earth? That's an easy one, 7. But wait a second, aren't Europe and Asia one large continent, Eurasia? It looks so when you look at the world map. Well, scientists think differently. They don't just look at bodies of land sticking out of the sea. Geoscientists study the types of rock that continents are made from. When you see the world from their perspective, the number of continents actually increases. Yes, they are not a myth. Lost continents exist, or at least they used to. They are hiding under other land masses. Peekaboo! Researchers have recently discovered one continent just like that. It's called Greater Adria. Sound familiar? Yes, it has something to do with the Adriatic Sea. This lost continent is completely buried under Europe. It collided with Europe and started to sink under it a long time ago. Today, it lies beneath Italy, Greece, and the Baltics. Its size and even shape matched that of Greenland, the world's largest island. But how did geoscientists find Greater Adria? It's no longer visible, but it left some clues. Parts of it were embedded in the Alps. Other chunks were incorporated into present-day Italy and Croatia, on the other side of the Adriatic Sea. Limestone rocks from the former continent started to change once they were under the European landmass. Tremendous heat and pressure spread over tens of millions of years changed their structure. Out goes the limestone, in comes the marble. All the Greek and Roman temples you admired on your summer vacation were constructed using this marble. It was sort of a going-away gift from a long-lost continent. Greater Adria camouflaged itself well for thousands of years, but other lost continents were hiding in plain sight. Have you heard of Earth's eighth continent, Zealandia? Probably not, because it sits under the surface of the Pacific Ocean. 95% of Zealandia is now underwater. Can you guess where exactly? Its name is a good hint – under New Zealand. If you open Google Maps, you can see its outline. Look for a lighter shade of blue in the ocean. It should stretch from New Caledonia to New Zealand. This bump in the ocean floor used to be above sea level. It was about 2/3 of Australia and more than twice the landmass of Greater Adria in size. We can spot Zealandia today because it hasn't sunk too low, and that's the best way to discover other lost continents. Imagine the Earth without the oceans. The bottom of the sea isn't flat. There are mountains and trenches. You could put Mount Everest in the deepest of them, and there would still be 7,000 feet between it and sea level. This trench got so deep because of a geological process called subduction. The Pacific Plate got under the Philippine Plate. Earth's crust is made out of those plates that float in a sea of molten rock. Then they bump into each other, one goes down while the other one rises. That's how Greater Adria ended up under the European continent. Our planet is constantly on the go. We don't notice this process because it happens deep beneath our feet. 120 million years ago, Australia and Antarctica were a single piece of land. Yep, the coldest and one of the hottest places on Earth were once the same territory. Antarctica said goodbye to Australia, but it didn't leave empty-handed. Today, there is an oceanic plateau in the Indian Ocean. The word plateau comes from French, and it means elevated flatland. And the name of this land sounds like the title of a Hollywood movie, Broken Ridge. Long ago, it was connected to another lost continent. Scientists believe that it made a land bridge between India and Antarctica. What was this land like? The answer possibly lies in a tiny archipelago in the southern Indian Ocean. These islands are all that is left of an ancient landmass. They have a cold climate. The islands feature glaciers because they're so close to Antarctica. But in the past, the climate must have been temperate with plenty of rainfall. The animals and plants would have been similar to those that we find in tropical regions today. The lost continent's landscape probably resembled that of New Zealand. Now, while we're in the area, can you guess which continent the island state of Madagascar once belonged to? If you guessed Africa, sorry, you were wrong. Hey, don't feel bad. Look up and to the right of the map. The correct answer is India. Some 120 million years ago, I wasn't around then, India separated from the African continent and went northeast. Madagascar wasn't quick enough and ended up as an island off the southeast coast of Africa. But there is evidence of an even greater landmass, the lost continent of Mauritius. Scientists found traces of the ancient landmass under the island of Mauritius. Today, it's a tourist hotspot, but millions of years ago, it was a real hotspot, volcanoes and all. That's how scientists were able to retrace the steps of Mauritius. They found a mineral that exists in rocks which lava spews out after an eruption. The long-lost land once covered the area from Mauritius to the west coast of India. Imagine if that land existed today. It would form a great mix of Indian and African cultures. The local dishes would definitely be spicy. Now, speaking of spicy, have you had Indonesian food recently? Just 50,000 years ago, Southeast Asia looked much different. There was no Sumatra, Borneo, Java, or even Australia. Just Sunda and Saul, two continental masses that were divided by a deep water trench. You had the extension of mainland Southeast Asia on one side and the Greater Australia on the other. Back then, Bali stood at the southernmost tip of Asia. Biologists were among the first scientists to notice the split. Species develop differently on Sunda and Sahul. That's why Australia has unique animals, such as the kangaroo, wombat, and platypus. And did you know that a giant kangaroo once roamed the island of New Guinea? That's because, up until the end of the last age, there was a land bridge to Australia. Today, the two islands are separated by the Torres Strait, but it's quite shallow, less than 65 feet. It's a reminder that this was once a single landmass called Sahul. Another ocean strait that isn't too deep separates Asia from North America. The Bering Strait sits today in the place of Beringia. This ancient landmass wasn't that big. It stretched 1,000 miles from north to south. That's just a third of the driving distance from Los Angeles to New York. Beringia was important for another reason. During the Ice Ages, it connected the whole world. Water levels were 300 feet lower than they are today. If they went even lower, you could walk from the Cape of Good Hope in Africa all the way to Cape Horn in South America. Talk about the ultimate backpacking route. Today, you can hop on an airplane and fly to pretty much any place on the globe. The world has never seemed smaller, has it? Well, it has. Some 300 to 200 million years ago, we were all one world, literally. Pangaea was a supercontinent that included all of the continents. Its name is in Greek, and it simply means all Earth. But Pangaea started to crack up. The biggest gap formed between the Americas on one side and Europe and Africa on the other. Seawater soon started pouring in, and that's how we got the Atlantic Ocean. This process is by no means over. While you are watching this video, North America is drifting further and further away from Europe at the rate of 1 inch per year. Doesn't seem much when compared to the average human lifespan, but in the end, all the continents will reconnect with each other, forming a supercontinent. And it wouldn't be the first time in Earth history that this happens. Honestly, I'm not going to wait around for that.
The last time this volcano erupted was about 500 years ago, but recently, small tremors have grown really frequent, to such an extent that scientists have been recording more than 1,000 a month. I'm talking about the Campi Flegrei supervolcano in Italy. At one point, just a few weeks ago, the area was rattled by a 4.4 magnitude earthquake with 150 tremors in just one night. It was the strongest earthquake in over 40 years. A lot of locals spent the night in their cars, but in the morning, the shakes were followed by another earthquake, a bit weaker with a magnitude of 3.6. So, is Italy in danger? Well, the quake itself wasn't big enough to cause serious damage, but it evoked a lot of panic. At the moment, local authorities are working on grandiose emergency plans. If worse comes to worse, they'll have to evacuate hundreds of thousands of people. One of the reasons is the proximity of this area to Naples with more than 3 million inhabitants. At the moment, they're even considering an option of paying people to leave their homes. Right now, schools remain closed in the Campi Flegrei area. The authorities are allocating more than 500 million euros to ensure the safety of buildings and constructions in the area. A yellow alert is still in place in the region where 80,000 people live. There's the so-called red zone, which is the most dangerous area. There are 1,250 houses in this red zone, and all of them will be at high seismic risk if an eruption begins. Plus, more than twice as many will be at medium risk. Italy is a country prone to seismic activity, and Pozzuoli is a densely populated area that is located on one of the most dangerous supervolcanoes in Europe. Campi Flegrei has 24 hidden underground craters and dwarfs the better-known Vesuvius. Yes, the very volcano that wiped the ancient Roman city of Pompeii off the face of the earth in 79 CE. This city thrived near the base of Mount Vesuvius at the Bay of Naples. In the time of the early Roman Empire, 20,000 people lived in Pompeii. They were merchants, manufacturers, farmers, and others. The soil in the region was rich and fertile, so there were lots of orchards and vineyards. Strangely, no one knew that this black earth was the legacy of an earlier eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The area was a favorite summer destination for rich Romans. Sadly, at noon on August 24, 79 CE, all this prosperity came to an end. The peak of Mount Vesuvius exploded, sending a 10-mile-high mushroom cloud of ash and pumice into the stratosphere. For the next 12 hours, the eruption was wreaking havoc on the city. Volcanic ash and a hail of pumice stones, some of which were 3 inches in diameter, showered Pompeii. It forced the city's occupants to flee in terror. Around 2,000 people holed up in stone structures and cellars, paralyzed by fear. They hoped to wait out the eruption. Who knows? Maybe if they had decided to leave the city immediately after the beginning of the eruption, they would have had some chances to survive. A westerly wind protected the city from the first stages of the eruption. But soon, a giant cloud of hot ash and gas rushed down the western slope of Vesuvius. It engulfed the city, burning everything in its way. This disastrous cloud was followed by a flood of volcanic mud and rock, which completely buried the city. As if the volcano was making sure no one would survive, a cloud of toxic gas poured onto the city, finishing the lives of a few survivors on August 25th. A flow of rock and ash followed. It collapsed roofs and walls and turned the city into a giant cemetery. When a supervolcano erupts, the consequences are usually catastrophic. Supervolcanoes have at least once had an eruption with a volcanic explosivity index of 8, which is the largest recorded number on the index. Supervolcanoes are often extremely large, with no cone at all. That's because they're typically the remains of gigantic magma chambers that once flared up, leaving behind a caldera. They're usually located over hotspots and appear when huge volumes of magma are trying to escape from deep underground. Eventually, they burst through Earth's surface. Sometimes, all this magma gets stuck, unable to break through the planet's crust. And then, massive pools of pressurized magma gather at a depth of several miles. The pressure keeps growing because more and more magma is trying to get to the surface. At one point, a super eruption goes off. The most recent super eruption happened in New Zealand. Well, when I say recent, I meant around 26,500 years ago. That's when a supervolcano beneath the surface of Lake Taupo spewed into the air more than 300 cubic miles of ash and pumice. Imagine 500,000 Great Pyramids of Giza flying up into the air at the same time. That's how incredibly powerful that eruption was. But the most exciting and confusing thing about the eruption was that the Taupo volcano didn't simply go off like many others. At first, everything was going as usual. Tons and tons of pressurized magma had built up under the surface, and the pressure was getting higher and higher. But after the rock cracked and the first portion of lava rushed out of the crater, something went wrong, and the supervolcano took a break. Only several months later, the disastrous eruption shook the ground. Thousands of tons of lava, rocks, and ash flew high into the atmosphere. The unusual pattern of Taupo still confuses scientists. The Indonesian eruption at Toba caldera 75,000 years ago was the largest eruption in the last 2 million years. Experts estimate that the eruption could have released hundreds of thousands of tons of sulfuric acid, which might have even caused a several-degree cooling of the planet's surface. But nowadays, the impact is hard to detect because of glaciers that covered the ground afterward. There are also several so-called supervolcanoes that haven't lived up to this name yet because they've never produced any super eruptions. For example, in 1883, Indonesian volcano Krakatoa went off. The power of the eruption tore the volcano's walls open, and cold seawater rushed into its molten insides. The difference in temperatures made the volcano blow up with a deafening boom. It was clearly heard 3,000 miles away in Australia. It earned the blast the title of the loudest sound in history. But even though the consequences of this event were truly catastrophic, it still turned out not powerful enough to be called a super eruption. It only had a volcanic explosivity index of 6. Then, there's also Mauna Loa. It's a shield volcano, which means it won't produce explosive eruptions, but its sheer size makes this monster of a volcano extremely dangerous. At the moment, the volcano seems to be at peace with its surroundings. Research equipment doesn't show any signs of activity on Mauna Loa, but if Mauna Loa did suddenly erupt, lava flows could reach the ocean and the most populated and touristy places like Captain Cook very fast, in a matter of hours. The last time the volcano erupted, lava got as far as the outskirts of Hilo on the other side of the island. That's where the University of Hawaii is located. Luckily, people had a few weeks' warning to get ready for the disaster. Over its recorded history, Mauna Loa has been erupting pretty regularly, almost every 6 years. On the bright side, big island volcanoes including Mauna Loa aren't really very volatile. That's because they're shield volcanoes. These volcanoes got such a name because they aren't really very high and resemble a warrior's shield placed flat on the ground. Shield volcanoes are formed by very fluid lava. It travels way farther and forms much thinner flows than the lava erupted from a stratovolcano, which is conically shaped and tall, like the infamous Krakatoa in Indonesia. So, if Mauna Loa erupts, there probably won't be ash clouds or tons of debris. The most dangerous thing will be lava. Since Mauna Loa is a shield volcano, its lava is extremely fluid and voluminous, which allows it to flow far and fast.
Ah, Phoenix. This sizzling gem in the Sonoran Desert isn't just another American city. It's more like a giant oven where you can throw a party, as long as you don't forget the ice. Seriously, if you find yourself here in the summer, brace yourself for some serious heat. We're talking about temperatures that regularly pass 100 degrees. And in 2024, Phoenix hit 110 degrees 55 times during the summer, tying the record set just the year before. Now, I get it if you're not a fan of hot weather, but apparently a lot of people love living in a sauna. Phoenix ranks as the 5th largest city in the United States, and it is the capital and most populous city in Arizona, with 1.7 million residents as of 2024. And if we're talking about the metropolitan area, also known as the Valley of the Sun, the population is almost 5 million. Yet, good luck finding someone actually born here. Out of every 4 Phoenix residents, 3 were born somewhere else. Believe it or not, Phoenix wasn't always this bustling, crowded place. It became one. A few decades ago, it was just a sleepy little dot on the map. Back in the 1940s, the population was around 65,000. It wasn't even close to cracking the top 100 list of the largest U.S. cities. Now, at that time, Phoenix was mostly an agricultural hub, and its economy revolved around what they called the 5 C's: cotton, citrus, cattle, climate, and copper. But things really started to change in the 1950s thanks to one life-changing invention. Drumroll please? The air conditioner. Actually, it was the portable version that came out in 1945, created by an American inventor named Robert Sherman. Phoenix residents owe a lot to Robert for making life bearable during scorching summers. Before AC, people in Phoenix would literally move their beds outside and build sleeping porches. They'd protect that kind of outdoorsy space with light curtains or some kind of net to keep the dust and bugs out. Fun. Anyway, the point is that the air conditioner played a big part in making Phoenix an easier place to live. Since the 1940s, this city in Arizona has transformed from a dusty little town into a sprawling urban jungle, and it's still one of the top 10 fastest-growing metro areas in the U.S. The best part is, it looks like that won't change anytime soon, since this 519-square-mile metropolis is surrounded by rolling desert, with plenty of room to keep growing as far as the eye can see. So, who's dropping everything to move to Phoenix? Well, Californians are the city's biggest fans. According to a recent survey, a third of all new renters moving to Phoenix come from Los Angeles. Okay, that survey might not be the most reliable since it only applies to the source's clients, but it does line up with U.S. Census Bureau data from 2019, which says that 70,000 Californians moved to Arizona in the previous year. The connection between Phoenix and LA is so strong that some people even call Phoenix the next LA. You've got to give Phoenix credit for capitalizing on its proximity to Southern California. The city offers lower taxes, fewer regulations, and lower costs of living, which makes it a magnet for businesses, especially in high-tech and service industries. So, in the 90s, Phoenix was considered a non-stop generator of jobs. In the last few years, we've seen the number of jobs only go up, and the unemployment rate has dropped by nearly half, going from 6.3 in January 2014 to 3.4 in the same month in 2024. Now, when it comes to big city problems, you can't avoid talking about traffic. But here's another reason why Phoenix is a dream city. It doesn't even come close to the traffic nightmares you find in places like LA. Estimates show that people in Los Angeles waste about 119 hours a year just sitting in traffic. But in Phoenix, it's more like 61 hours. Huge difference, huh? And let's not even start talking about the money people waste just sitting in traffic. In LA, drivers burn through about $2,440 worth of gas per year. In Phoenix, they waste 25 gallons of fuel, which ends up costing about $952. Yeah, that's still a lot of cash, but compared to LA, come on, that's a steal. Phoenix being okay in terms of traffic might have a lot to do with how the city was designed. Just take a look at a map of Phoenix. You'll notice it looks like someone took a ruler and drew perfectly straight lines for the roads. That's because the city was laid out in a grid system. This setup makes it so much easier to get around, especially compared to cities full of confusing twists, U-turns, and one-way streets. It just simplifies things, whether you're a local or a tourist. Plus, Phoenix has nice wide streets. Most cities have one major road and a bunch of narrow streets that just can't handle heavy traffic. But Phoenix has wide roads everywhere. So, when the freeways get jammed, you can just hop onto a parallel street and still get to work without stressing out too much. When you look at all the job opportunities and the relatively smooth traffic, it's no wonder people are willing to put up with the heat and move to Phoenix. But don't get it twisted, the heat is no joke. It is really, really hot and sunny out there. We're talking about 300 days of sunshine on average, or about 85% daylight hours per year. But once again, Phoenix has made the best of it, and all that constant sunshine has turned Phoenix into one of the top solar energy cities in the country. Now, you may be wondering, a city in the middle of the desert with barely any rain, do they actually have enough water? Well, they do. Phoenix has its water situation pretty well sorted out, thanks to multiple sources. I mean, they don't rely on rain alone, which is a good thing because, desert life. Most of their water comes from way up north and east of the valley, where snow melts off the mountains and flows into giant reservoirs, storing it up for those dry years. But most of Phoenix's water comes from the Salt River Project, which brings water through canals and pipelines from the Salt and Verde rivers. Then there is the Central Arizona Project, which transports water all the way from the Colorado River. They even get a bit of water from underground wells. And Phoenix doesn't want to waste a drop, so they're smart about recycling, reusing treated water to keep parks green, and even recharging their groundwater. Since Phoenix is all about sunny skies nearly every day of the year, it's normal that people can get a little moody when it actually rains. But here's the thing. Phoenix always gets a surprise up its sleeve, even when it comes to bad weather. When it rains in the deserts, locals get treated to this unique earthy smell. It's thanks to the creosote bush, a desert plant that releases an amazing fragrance when the rain hits it. People describe it as the smell of rain, and honestly, it's one of those fresh, clean scents that makes you forget you're in the desert for a second. And if you've never stopped to think about why Phoenix is called Phoenix, well, it's based on that famous legend of the bird that rises from the ashes. Now, after knowing all the special things about this city and its unique ability to turn challenges into advantages, we can say the name couldn't have been better chosen.